Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question, or at least to explore it. I'm hoping the guests' musings, curiosity, lines of inquiries, and experiences will prompt your own inquiry into what this question means to you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 90th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Seb Randle. Seb is founder of The Helpful Space, a space dedicated to exploring pragmatic and practical solutions to help individuals to where they want to be. His approach is grounded in warmth, kindness, curiosity, and a deep understanding of what it takes to create lasting change. Seb is also Head of Allyship at Bloom North and a people-focused consultant and coach. In this engaging conversation, Seb shares with us his journey of exploring his own truth. He shares with us key moments of his own life that encompassed family counselling in his teens, coming out to his mother and family, and developing a more loving relationship with his own body. Each experience in life offering him the opportunity to understand or reveal more about who he is. Seb also highlights the importance of how he shows up for others, the exploration of who we are at our core, the value of releasing self-judgement, living with intention, and exploring our blind spots. If you are feeling unsure of who you are, seeking to connect more deeply with your truth, or feeling daunted by life's challenges, this conversation offers plenty of thought-provoking insights. Seb's relatable experiences and lived wisdom may offer new perspectives for whatever it is you are currently navigating. Look, I took a lot from this conversation. Seb is someone who I've shared multiple spaces before in group dialogues, and he's always someone that I thought to be very genuine, thoughtful, and insightful. And I think you're going to find the same when you listen to this conversation. So I think you're going to take a lot from this episode. And if you enjoy this conversation, please like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And please continue to leave your lovely reviews if you're on the podcasting platforms. Please check out the show notes below to find out more about Seb's work, and indeed for ways of contacting me, whether that's for one-on-one coaching, to explore your own lines of self-inquiry, to join my weekly free silent conversation groups, or to hear more about ways in which I can help your leadership teams build trust, communication, and connection. You can also find a link to the podcast newsletter where you can read about what these conversations that you're listening to have evoked in me. So that's all I have to say for this week. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. And so without further ado, the 90th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Seb, thank you very much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. After sharing many spaces with you in conversation, I've always thought you'd be someone very interesting to bring on for such a conversation. So thank you very much for joining me today.
No problems at all. I'm made up to be here.
So Seb, as you know, the first question that I ask is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
There's many questions. Yeah, and knowing that I was coming on this podcast today, I guess it's been playing on my mind a little bit. And I suppose the thing that I'm really trying to achieve in life is a meaningful and authentic life that is maybe free from as many regrets as possible.
And with that, what's your kind of evolution been like with that? Is there something that ignited such a notion?
I think so. A lot of it is coming down to probably my work at the moment these days, because I haven't always been a coach, but I've been coaching since about 2019, and I'm often trying to support other people with finding that sense of connection to who they are, what they're about, what their purpose is, all of these different things. So I think there's a natural sort of evolution for me to start thinking that way about my own life. And it's interesting because often when you work in this way and you support other people in that way, sometimes it's quite difficult to apply the same sort of lessons or learnings to your own life. So that's something that I'm kind of aware of and that I'm maybe trying to improve a little bit. But I think there's also something around the regrets bit is quite interesting. So free from as much regret as possible. And something that I sort of remember quite clearly is when my granddad was basically dying. It was his last couple of weeks, and my mum had a really, really strong relationship with him. And she ended up spending the last kind of 4 or 5 days sort of solid with him in the hospital as he basically moved towards breathing his last breath in a room that he'd been, given after they knew that he wasn't going to make it. And it was devastating to think that she was having to do that. And I know that it would have really been incredibly difficult for her to do that as well. But she said to me afterwards, like a few weeks later, she said she just realized that it'd been really important for her to have no regrets when it came to sort of her family in particular. And I think that really stuck with me because I'm the closest people to me, my friends, my family, that sort of which I spend my time with a hell of a lot of people. They're all super, super sort of important. And I know that anyone would say that, but I think there's just something in that when it comes to how you give yourself to others. I don't want to have any regret in the way that I show up for the people around me. I think that's the main thing, more so than for myself. I don't mind having regrets for myself because I feel like I sort of learn from those things. But for other people, I don't want to have any regrets.
And so, what gives you a sense of peace in even how you're dealing with, those close connections to you?
Um, I think I've always been quite a thoughtful person. I feel like generally, I hope I've been quite a considerate person. I do a lot of work around sort of allyship. I'm a head of allyship as a volunteer role. And going through the process of learning about allyship and privilege and all of those different things, you start to reflect a little bit on your own behaviors. And I have realized that historically, maybe I haven't always made the right choices, and I have made the wrong decisions. I've betrayed trusts, or I've spoken about things that I shouldn't have done, or I've raised my voice, or I've done all of these different things. And I think that was a key sort of learning for me in terms of how I want to show up in the world. But I think there was quite a strong foundation there around kind of being interested in people, wanting to support people, wanting to, I don't know, yeah, just be there for the important people around me and for other people. If I can say something or do something that is going to make an impact on another person in a positive way, then that's really important for me.
When you said the sense of regret with yourself, of just being that, like the way you were interpreting that was just kind of like, well, I'll learn from that or whatever it may be. It was just intrigued. Like, is there something even you've noticed or realized in terms of your own sense of regret with yourself that has helped you? I don't know, that has helped you navigate that, or what was coming up there?
There's one particular thought which is actually quite dark in some ways. So I've often thought that if it came to kind of like a terminal illness, for example, I don't know. We all have these types of thoughts that can take us away or take us into sort of like these deep spells of thinking or whatever. But I've always thought that I would be able to deal with it so much better for myself than if it was somebody else around me or if it was like an important person to me. And I suppose that's where it comes from. It's kind of like, it's almost like I've got a trust in myself in many ways. It's like I've got a trust in myself that I know I can feel things quite strongly, and I can feel hurt, or I can feel confused, or I can feel whatever. But there's a lot of trust in the fact that I can manage that relationship for myself, and I can deal with whatever it is that comes into my path when it's about me. When it's about me, it's fine. But when it's about somebody else, it's almost like it takes that control away from me, and that's where I sort of go into a spin. And obviously, if we're talking about illnesses and things like that, that's terrifying for me to think that I might lose somebody in that sort of way. So I think it's about that, really.
So that resonates a bit with me as well. And no, no thoughts of death in my mind's eye are all that dark. To be honest, I think they're kind of inevitable, right? But the sense of, I guess, like the of trust that you're noticing, like, is that something that's been developing for you in life? Is that something that you felt kind of innately, or how would you kind of even categorize that?
Mm. I think it stems from my youth. I I had maybe some relationship breakdown, shall we say, sort of in my family, and a bit of there was animosity between parents who were breaking up. And I was at quite a sort of an impressionable age when those kinds of conversations were happening. And then there were there was actually a situation where I ended up going to relate because of my sort of relationship with one of my parents that maybe wasn't how I wanted it to be, or how anyone wanted it to be, and various each of us in the scenario had things that we sort of wanted to be different. And I was quite young; I was a young teenager at that point. But I can just remember the sort of way that I felt going into that, and sort of the lady as well. I can remember the lady called Vera, who was kind of my therapist or counselor, and she had like the kindest face and these sort of like rosy cheeks and this like frizzy fringe and hair that I can really sort of almost like I can imagine her being in the room. And this is when I was 14 and I'm 47 now. And I suppose because there was a conflict where people didn't really fully understand what was happening in this situation, and therefore I was brought into the mix to kind of give the explanation on the basis that it was about me and it was about my care. And it was, I can remember eyes sort of looking to me for like the truth of what was going on for me. And it sort of taught me very early on to be quite clear on sort of who I am or what I stand for or what matters to me, all these types of things. I feel like I got a really strong sense of self actually from being in that scenario and having to work through those feelings at sort of quite an impressionable age. And I've often thought about that since becoming a coach and working with people one to one. I'm often taken back to that first encounter that I had of that type of work with somebody and how that sort of made me feel. And it's been like a full circular journey to kind of come back to that by doing the work that I'm doing now.
Vera sounds absolutely delightful.
She was. She was.
With that sense, then, do you think it's always I think it's always interesting what people are trying to cultivate in our own lives in order to not like even hide us from suffering or some strain or whatever it may be. But it's kind of amazing what can come from, or like almost the revealing that can come from a state of what could be stress or, strain or whatever it may be. Like it's just when I hear that question, who I am, and then, and it's something being revealed in a situation that you're obviously not wishing for, but then this is what occurs from it. I think that's a really Yeah, that's a really curious part of life, I think.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And I think, it's so important to feel those things. I think that's something else that I think is important for me, is feeling feelings and emotions and situations, and not not dulling those in many ways, experiencing them. But I know that if you stay in those kind of difficult feelings for too long, then that's where it becomes quite sort of problematic. So, this has always been quite interesting for me, because I experience overthinking and negative thoughts and things like that quite a lot. And I can remember reading Susan David, Emotional Agility, and she talks about, observing the feelings and maybe sort of like imagining it's like a bus that's going past into the distance, and soon enough it'll be in the distance and you'll be feeling something else and the situation will have moved on, and that's kind of reassuring, which it is to a certain extent. And now I'm actually doing another course. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, by a guy called, it's a book actually, by a guy called Shazad Chameen, and it's called Positive Intelligence. Have you come across that before?
No, I haven't. No.
It's really interesting, because he talks about, as soon as you get into that sort of negative thinking, your judge comes in. Your judge either comes in to judge you, to judge other people, or to judge a circumstance. And whilst it's good to take note of what the judge is saying, it's really important to move out of that headspace as soon as you possibly can. And he talks about these sage powers that you then bring in, which are like curiosity or empathy, or all these different things that can help you sort of navigate that situation a bit better. And that really sort of appeals to me, this sort of like pragmatic way to move out of something. You can feel it, but then I think you have to have those resources to be able to then move with it and utilize it in the way that you say. It's identifying something. What am I now going to do with that in order to reframe it as something helpful?
Yeah, I think the judgment part in any of that's the fascinating bit, almost in terms of the duration of whatever this thought or energies may, like, for the duration they may visit us, like, because it's always, I think, the a judgment in some ways usually saying that something about what is right now is not right. And then so I always think it's that resistance to whatever it is right now is the thing that will elongate the experience, which is I don't know, I guess we're raised to almost be somewhat like self-critical, like, just in some of the ways, like comparing ourselves when we're kids in school. Where did you come in the class? Like lots of different comparison stuff that I think that plays into that as well.
Definitely, definitely. And I think there's something here about what you've got control of that exists within you and what your external forces are. And I talk to my coaching clients about this a hell of a lot, because firstly, I think there's like a core that sits within us, which is like our like self-knowledge, what we know about ourselves and who we are, that is crucially important for people to define. And I think the world, the way that it is now with social media and these types of platforms, that obviously encourages us all to go out there and showcase our lives, but it's it's incredibly fascinating for me, working with young people in particular in Gen Z, how many people, even though we're in this world that encourages us to kind of display ourselves to everybody, how many of these people don't actually know what's in their core, or what they stand for, or what problems they solve, or what their unique strengths are, or all of these different things. And I think a really important part of having that meaningful life in this complex world. I often describe it as like setting your foundations in the ground, right? If you know yourself and you know what you stand for, and you have that that sort of like core system within you that where you understand yourself, it sort of grounds you so that whenever all these external forces come into play, whenever your manager's breathing down your neck, or whenever there's problems in the world like there is at the moment, all these external factors that can potentially throw you off course, there's something that sort of grounds you and holds you. And that also applies to like the habits that you have, and you know, all of these different things that fundamentally feed into who you are and what you're about, I think is really crucial for people to know, particularly in the world that we live in right now.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think it's with that firm knowledge as well. Though it's easier to navigate the external chaos or something like that. It's all kind of it offers almost something to be in relationship with then, while knowing where you stand. Like I think it becomes less the chaos becomes less chaotic, where at least you know you stand in relation to it. The there was something you said earlier though, just even around judgment. Like, has there, for you yourself, like, have there been things of letting go of judgment in yourself, for like when you're going through this process, like of things for you, or has that been has that been a smooth relationship with yourself in terms of judgment?
Mm, it's an interesting one. It's probably something I'm still working through a little bit. I think I definitely, if I'm in an exchange with somebody else, I've definitely become much more aware of my judgment, and maybe keeping a bit quieter at certain times when naturally I might have wanted to sort of step in or try and solve something, or I might have had a point that just needed to get out, so I would have shared it and not really understood where we were in the conversation, and therefore it wasn't my time to speak. So I think from that point of view, when it's my judgment of other people, I'm becoming a lot better. Um, in terms of that sort of judgment of myself, yeah, I don't necessarily with judgment of others. I tend to feel something in a moment, whereas with judgment of myself, it's not really like, oh, I do something and then all of a sudden I wish I hadn't done it. It's more of a sort of slow burner type feeling. And I think if you sort of invest in yourself and get to know yourself and start to like yourself and who you are and what you stand for, that sort of judgment piece goes a lot quieter. So yeah, I think there's like an immediacy that comes from judgment of others, because you know what's in your own head most of the time, whereas you don't know what you're going to be met with somebody else. So that can often be a more instantaneous thing.
That's a lovely way to describe it, though. Is there something that you've done where you've, like, did you typically like yourself, if you know what I mean, or is that like, because if I were to map my own journey, I'd say it was more I don't know, like an insecure arrogance up until my early 30s, and then an unraveling, and then kind of liking what I found when things unraveled. Do you know what I mean? Like, or a delayering of personas or projections or whatever. And then like a very welcoming sense of like, oh, I actually quite like this person underneath all this this stuff that I was almost trying to pretend to be something else. For you, how would you kind of characterize that journey for yourself?
Oh God, that's a really interesting one. Um, so your initial question, that sort of liking myself thing, I think I have pretty consistently liked myself. I feel like I've gone through a lot of changes. There's some like fundamental life lessons along the way. Definitely the whole thing around sort of family, and that was a key one, because there were challenges at that time with both both parents, really, in terms of how those relationships were going to play out. And now I've got incredibly strong relationships with both of them. And like, that's a massive success in my eyes. And I've played a big part in delivering that. And then also navigating sexuality, having a girlfriend back in the day, coming out, all of these different things. That was something to kind of work through and navigate. I also had some really big challenges around kind of body image, body confidence, where my body just changed and developed in a way that I didn't really expect it to, where there were lumps and bumps in the wrong places. And when I had to play sports with, other teenagers when I was at school, and we got asked to take our tops off and play in skins, as it was called back then, because we didn't have enough shirts for everyone. I was like, what the hell? I was completely mortified because all of these things that were sort of on show to people, and I would get mocked for it. And so, and that actually ended up sticking with me from early teens through to late 20s, when I realized, late 20s, how much my lack of body confidence had been holding me back in terms of developing relationships, or going on holiday with friends, or just doing like the basics that everybody expects to be able to do. And I'd been sort of repressing all of these things because of that. So I actually ended up going on the operating table and having some surgery. And it was the best thing I ever did. It didn't resolve a lot of the things that I felt. It was the start of me working towards a more positive view of myself, I think. So the reason I'm explaining all of these things is that I feel like I've navigated those. I feel like I've driven a successful outcome over a period of time with each of these challenges that I've had. And I'm proud of myself for doing that. And I'm proud of how I've approached it. And I think, a lot of us don't take the time, because of the pace of life, to reflect on successes, or how we've managed to overcome things, or how we're feeling now versus how we were feeling, say, 3 years ago, or whatever. So I think I've been able to congratulate myself, I suppose, for the things that I've been able to do, which is definitely part of it. And then, I like to be a bit fun and a bit daft and a bit silly, and I like to be liked and, warm and approachable in that way as well. So there's sort of different layers to how I try and be for people, I suppose.
Yeah, I think our relationship with our bodies is a fascinating one, though. Like, it's, I don't know, like there's something within that, on reflection, like, even if I think of parts of my body that I would either have felt shame for, or whatever would have been the experience I had, like, it's kind of like, even if looking at the same body parts at times, then just kind of going, Jesus, I was a bit harsh on you for a while, like and to do it to ourselves, it's, and I know you're saying in a circumstance there with playing skins, and other people perhaps commenting, and of course other people commenting on things as well. Like, it's amazing. There was always this talk by Ramdas that I remember hearing, of just, we'd never walk through a forest and say, that one's too short, that one's too tall, that one's too bumpy, that one's too this and that. And yet we, like, I don't know, it's kind of amazing that we do it to ourselves. Do you know what I mean? And even just to each other, in the way that we're all just these beautifully unique
We're just
creatures.
a concoction of cells, aren't we? We're just a concoction of cells at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And we're trained, aren't we, to think these things, and we have to disassociate from it. You'll find this quite interesting. So when I was just coming up to 40, and I was listening to a podcast, and the question being asked on this podcast was, if you were in couples counselling with your body, what would it say to you?
Jesus.
And that really stopped me in my tracks, because even though I'd been on this like journey, I'd never really been a particularly active person. I'd never really embraced fitness or exercise particularly. I'd always thought that I could just get by being a 6'4" guy who, most people, if I'm dressed or whatever, they wouldn't think anything about my physique or shape or whatever. But what I realized from that question was that my body would say, "You've known me for 40 years and you've barely even looked at me."
Phew.
And that was my moment to realize that we only have one shell that is supposedly going to take us to aged 80, 90, 100. Why the hell have I not been doing anything to invest in it, or to nurture it, or to strengthen it, or to, you know? And it was just like a moment to the head where I just suddenly realized, what the hell have you been doing, for God's sakes? Like, make this a priority. And so, yeah, I got myself a personal trainer, just came out of the blue, following on from listening to this thing, and started that ball rolling, and have kind of veered from personal training to other types of fitness and circuits and hiking and whatever ever since. And I've come to the point now, 7 years later, where it's inbuilt into the way that I live my life. It's a core function of how I operate now. So that's been a huge, that, again, going back to the things that I've been sort of proud of and what I've navigated. Okay, so it took me till 40 to kind of realize it, but once I got the awareness, I applied it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though. I think we're almost coming to it from different sides then, in the sense of I would have exercised quite a lot. And I think it's only since I've started to go down more of a journey of, self-realizations or inquiry, that I'm far more loving of my body. Before, it would have been everything has to be, in air quotes, almost perfect, even though it never, not in the sense that a body is perfect as it is in ways. But if I put on a small bit of weight or something, my confidence in my body was very small, if you know what I mean. And then
Mm,
if I did everything right, then there'd be a confidence in it, if you know what I mean. But it was I'd say my body would say that I was quite unforgiving of fluctuations or things like that. And I don't know, for me, it was really interesting to see just how conditional my love for my body was, but probably also by extension for myself, just in life in general at that point.
yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm sure a lot of men would maybe go that way, as opposed
Mm.
to maybe the way that sort of I've gone. And there's definitely like a balance to strike, isn't there? Like there is with anything. My dad always says everything in moderation, and he's so right.
Even moderation, right?
Yeah. Um, but
But
yeah,
when you mentioned then even just the idea of, you said you had a girlfriend at one point, and then just the process of coming out, then like what was the kind of, was there a unique moment within that you reflect on, just in the sense of your relationship with yourself as well?
it's very peculiar, because you know what you're thinking about, you know where your mind is, but you can't clarify it. You can't put it into like oh my God, this is what I'm thinking, so this therefore means I am X. You just can't do it for a period of time. It's like the thing is happening and it's just going under the radar. Well, not for everybody, because obviously some people, when you tell them, say, yeah, and when, I could have told you that a couple of years ago.
Right.
um, so it's really odd. In some ways, I'd love to go back and feel those things again to sort of, with my more mature head on, to try and get my head around it a little bit. But I guess essentially you're still finding your feet with the world, aren't you? So you just can't fully understand or compute these things. But I think that when it really hit for me was when I met my first partner that I was remotely interested in. That's when it all kind of came together, because I think this comes back to my love of people and the people around me, and the fact that I need to be my best for them, because I'd met somebody and all of a sudden I wanted to put him on a pedestal. I wanted to show him off to my family and my friends. And that was suddenly like, oh, hang on, it's not about me anymore. It's about this person. And therefore I've got the strength to say it and the strength to tell people. But it's such an interesting thing. I mean, I'm a very emotional person. I feel things and I do get upset sometimes. And because I knew that telling my mum, who is the closest person to me, really was going to be hard. Because if you think, this was when I was 23, so it's like half my lifetime ago. Quite late, really, for someone. Well, it's not late for someone to come out, but relatively late in the grand scheme of things. I can just remember thinking, I'm not going to be able to say this how I want to say it. So I had a letter written out where, I'd mentioned my partner that I'd been seeing for a few months, and I'd just kind of been as clear as I could about it all. And sure enough, I went in, I said my first line or two, and then like broke down. I handed her the envelope, and then I sat on the sofa with my knees in my arms, like sort of rocking a little bit, as I watched my mum put her glasses to the end of her nose and read this letter as she walked up and down the conservatory or whatever. And I can just remember thinking, please say the right thing, please say the right thing. And luckily she did. But it was something to really sort of navigate back then, because it was such a different world. My family and my immediate friends had always thought that I wanted to be a dad. And obviously, back in the day when I came out, that wasn't even a possibility for gay people. So the first question from a couple of people was, but you want to be a dad?
Right.
How can you make that choice when you want to be a dad? And I was like, you don't understand. Like, this is just how it is, and I have to work with what I've got. So that was one thing, and then the health implications were another. It was terrifying for my mum to think that I was mixing in that sort of circle that might hurt me. So it was a different consideration back then, and I can rationalize some of the reactions that I got back then because of the world that we were in, and in many ways we've progressed, and I'm really grateful for sort of that as well. So and since then I've had a really long term relationship of nearly 10 years that sadly ended a couple of years ago, and I'm in a new relationship now. So it's been a real like journey for me, that, and it definitely feeds into just this, I guess, the sense that I prioritize knowing who I am and what is important to me. That's a big part of me, knowing who I am. And I know there's people out there who haven't got to that point yet. Maybe people who are my age and still haven't managed to get to that realization for themselves.
Well, that's just the way you even described that image of you kind of rocking back and forth, and your mum even taking the time to put her glass at the end of the nose. Like it sounds like it's so like vivid for you. Like,
Oh, it totally is. Totally is. Just like Vera and she had these sort of like little veins on her cheeks that I remember as well. And yeah, just totally in those moments. I feel like everyone must have some real core life defining moments that they can sort of remember. Even the podcast, even listening to that podcast and making sort of a new contract with my body at that
Mm.
time.
Which is kind of, even incredible, like, the sense of just as much as we can try to do the right things for ourselves, like, even the way you were just saying there, like, please say the right thing, please say the right thing, like, then it's just so nice that we can be so, I don't know, not, there's a huge dependency or interdependence, I would say, as well, with our environment or the people that are in it as well at different times, where, like, just the right thing at the right time can be just so welcome or so helpful, instead of us having to have that to be the fuel or something else to unravel or to figure out as well. How can we deal with our reaction to what we perceive to be the wrong reaction, I guess.
Mm. I don't know what I have to say to that one. But yeah, like definitely. I think it's funny, isn't it? Like when you say all that, I'm just thinking about how much luck is there in all of this
Mm.
for things to converge. I'm a big believer, really, in us being in control in many ways. I think we're very complex, and we have 10,000 thoughts a day, even though most of them aren't particularly helpful. um, but we have the capacity within us to move forward in a way that is intentional or authentic or kind, or these are the types of words that I think are really important to sort of live by. And I think that's the best you can do. Like there's a lot of external forces at play, like we spoke about before, and obviously they're pretty powerful too. All we need to do is to switch the telly on to understand that. But so long as you like tread that intentional path with kindness, then you can't go far wrong. You're just going to have to deal with any situations that might not go your way and realize that that's life, as they say.
Yeah, yeah. It's, I think, even if intentionality and then kindness for yourself, like the way I've even broken that down sometimes is if I show up with, if I pay attention or if there's presence, and if I'm my own natural self, like, well, then what can go wrong? Like, I'm never going to regret, um, on my deathbed, the idea that I was myself. And even this sense for you, like, if you show up with intentionality, and then if there's kindness derived from that as well, well,
Mm.
whatever is going to happen is going to happen. So it's kind of, even if control is something that you feel that that's a deliberate thing or something, or that's something, that how you perceive it. There's also by the sounds of it, a welcoming, or as long as you've controlled what you've controlled, the outcome for which we can't always control, there can be a peace in it not always being the way we want it to be.
Yeah, yeah. But just as you were saying that, it was making me think about how there's blind spots for us as well, right? There's blind spots. And I think having some kind of awareness or some kind of check in with yourself about what those potential things might be. As you were talking, it was making me think about, I think it's called the rocking chair, not test, or it's like a visualization that you can do with people. When you mentioned about when you're older, and when you get to that point when you're old, and the regrets or the thoughts that you might have, there's this rocking chair visualization where you project forward to aged 85 or whatever, and you try and envisage where you are. And I did this with a coach like just a few years back, as in he put me into the visualization. And I was in this really kind of like a sort of cottage, decent sized cottage. I can remember there was like a graveled front that you would drive onto, and then there were like some rolling hills in the distance, and there was a fire on, and there was a dog near my feet, and it felt cozy. There was a feeling of contentment, but there were no people. There were literally no people. There were no friends even. I couldn't visualize my siblings. I just felt really like alone. And I've just been telling you about how important people are to me. And like, I actually had to stop it. I had to say, look, I get what you're doing, and it's sort of given me something here, but I don't really know what to do with it at the moment because I can't understand why this is what I'm seeing. And it's sort of was the catalyst for thinking about whether I do want to be a dad or not. Having mentioned to you about what the reactions were when I came out as gay, but you want to be a dad, and then living my gay life for 2 decades, and sort of coming to terms with the fact that I didn't want to be a dad, mainly because my ex-partner didn't want to be a dad. But then going through this visualization and expecting to see lots of people around me because that's who I am and that's what people know me for, only to just be left completely alone. And it's, this is like a bit of, I could continue in my world doing what I'm doing, hanging out with my mates, being a good coach, and not trying to really get to the nub of this question. That's sort of in my blind spot. I don't really know what the answer to it is. I don't know whether that visualization is telling me that that's a really important thing for me to do, or whether my mind's playing tricks on me, or whether I'm just, maybe sort of that was some kind of goodbye to that in some ways. I don't know. So I think there's something about seeking your own truth and honesty within all of this as well, and trying to persevere around some of those bigger questions that maybe you're like keeping closeted for whatever reason.
That's the third image you've kind of given me that's just really clear or vivid again, like even this one just being a thought into the future. Like this life and this journey even of self-knowledge, or the question you said you're often asking yourself or reflecting on of who I am. Like there's a simplicity and a complexity to this that are both equally important and mind-blowing for me. But what an image to be left with, even just to contemplate, or for it to surface every so often.
What you mean in the rocking chair?
Yeah.
I know it's mad, really, isn't it? Like I think about these things, and I think the other day I was thinking, I bet that if I've thought about something like this for like 2 decades and sort of had that internal dialogue with myself, that if I don't have children, there'll be some life that I will experience where I have loads. or where my main purpose in life is the role of father that I will feel. I almost I convinced myself that, look, if you don't manage to make the decision, it's all right. The world will make it happen for you in some other way. you'll be reincarnate and you'll be you'll be living it somehow.
But
um,
is that something? I know you're kind of laughing there, but is that something that you'd hold in consideration?
I often think there are so many miracles. Sorry, there are so many miracles in life that we just take for granted. Like, we're so aware of this life because we live it every single day that we just, we're moving so fast all the time. We're chasing things. We're greedy for, advancement and whatever, and that we've lost touch of how fucking incredible this life is. And like, I often think, therefore, there's so much that we can't see. If this is all the stuff that we can see and experience, what can we not see? And so sometimes I like to go on a little, voyage of discovery in my own mind about what that could be. And I like the idea that there's something more. I'm not a religious person. I don't need to know. I don't need to know. But like, there's almost like a sense of peace and contentment within myself that I will potentially find out one day. Who knows? And that's fine. I think maybe again that is linked to living that sort of intentional life and being kind. And if there's more, there's more. If there's not, there's not. I can be quite philosophical about it, but that doesn't stop me wondering what are the possibilities.
Do you know, when you say that, two images kind of come to mind for me in terms of even what I've been reflecting on the last little while, like about cutting out this wonder as well of life. Like, it was, I have a 11-month-old child now, obviously, but then just seeing my wife go through the process when she was pregnant, like that was just mind blowing to me, in the sense of, I know we just say, okay, two people have sex and a child is created essentially, or whatever, but the like, just seeing something grow from a tiny thing, like it's not just this taken for granted thing. And I also had the same thought in my head around, like, if I show you a seed and you say it's going to become like a chestnut tree outside, like, yeah, of course, that's just how things go. But you see this tiny seed in your hand that could become this huge thing that could last for hundreds of years.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
that's staggering, like, in ways, if you know what I mean. So it's,
Oh yeah.
I really agree with you. And I think even just with what you mentioned there about the striving for like continuous development, it has made us, lose sight of so many of the miracles that exist right here, right now, and indeed what I think you were pointing to as well, blunted our capacity to really perceive anything outside of the kind of narrow lanes of life that we've said that this is what it's all about. And
Definitely.
I think there's, yeah, I'm quite like yourself in the sense that I don't need to have an answer to it, but there's something in me which just acknowledges the capacity for things to be in existence beyond my ability either to perceive them or even maybe just perceive them right now.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And they don't have to be wonders either. They can actually just be simple things
Yeah.
too. Um, just that go unnoticed. And I know this is really playing into a lot of your work at the moment, which is great. Just bringing our awareness to the spaces in between things and what else is there. And going back to positive intelligence, which I mentioned to you before, um, there's a he talks about, when you're moving from these saboteurs, which he identifies as these sort of like characters, your inner voice is playing out in these saboteurs. So there might be the pleaser or the controller or the hypervigilant, and you're trying to sort of quieten them by using these other powers, which sounds a bit, we don't have time to go into it in full, but he brings in certain mindfulness techniques that I've always struggled with, sort of mindfulness or seeing a thought and then allowing it to sort of pass or not pay attention to it. I sometimes think, well, how am I supposed to do that? And in this, he really brings you back to sort of sensations a little bit in order to help you. And I know there's other modes of thought that do that too, but just, like rubbing your fingertips together, for example, which is something that you don't do very often, but you feel the ridges all of a sudden of your fingertips and you're like, whoa. And then you like move your fingers into the palm of your hand and you're like, I never even feel those sensations. What the hell's going on? Or listen to a sound that's really far away. Try and focus on a sound really far away, and you try and do it through these other sounds. And then now listen to a sound that's really close. Now listen to the two sounds together. And I'm like, what is this? Like you. And it's been really good for me. It's been really good for me to almost like have a task within the mindfulness that
Yeah.
really helps me to put a focus on something that's helpful. I can't remember exactly why I was mentioning this, but it was specifically in relation to whatever you just said.
I'm I'm glad you
Noticing,
I'm glad you did because no, I just noticing it doesn't even have to be miraculous things you're saying. It's also just the smaller things. And to be honest, I was doing that with my fingertips and then putting my finger in my palm as well as you're doing it. And I was like, wow, this is pretty wild. I'm still doing it right now. So I'm even if you couldn't remember the connection to it, I'm glad you mentioned it. Look, Seb, just because of the time we're at, and you know, through this conversation, even of opening up, of just not wanting to have this sense of regret in life, and then also a big part of that seems to be an ongoing discovering and understanding of who you are. Mentioning seminal moments in your life of even with Vera, with your, with uh, like developing or like listening to that podcast and developing a relationship with your body in a much more loving way. The experience of coming out and with your mother, moving back and forth in the room, and just once again appreciating like these experiences in life, and they all seem to be quite an invitation to find out more about yourself. And then this place from which you stand from very seems to be quite clearly as well, like to approach life with a sense of intentionality, and then to approach life with a sense of kindness as well, and the importance of people. And then this gorgeous image dangling there that we'll probably, you and I will probably chat about again, of just like there's no one around in this future image. And even just the openness then to say, there's blind spots or things don't fully make sense right now, but just to continue to just hold that. And even as you were mentioning, it's not so important to have the answer, even onto wider questions of existence and so forth and what happens, but just the holding of it there. But once again, just this paying attention and this noticing in this life as well. Given all that we've discussed today, Seb, I'd love to hear your answer to the question of what is a good life for you.
oh gosh, we've covered a lot of ground. um, a good life is definitely its intentionality, but it's also deep connection with others. And I want a third thing, not being scared to explore your truth. That's it.
Yeah, I just thought I'd leave that hang for a second there, just to not being afraid to explore your own truth. Um, I don't know. I've never heard it put like that. I think that's an absolutely gorgeous expression.
Hmm. Can be challenging at times, but I don't think you have to do it all the time. It's it's just almost like a soundtrack that's important that you need to like pay attention to.
Yeah, I'd fully agree with that. Look, Seb, I've really enjoyed the conversation with you today. Really enjoyed the perspectives you shared and the insights you shared as well. So look, Thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast.
Thanks so much, mate.